Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus. Please be seated. Welcome Martina to speak for us today.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Martina Eaton, and I'm lucky enough to be Andrew Eaton's sister. I would also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we're meeting on today, the Awabakal people. I recognise their continued connection to land, waters and community, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present, who carry the memories, traditions, cultures and aspirations of First Peoples, and who forge the path ahead for emerging leaders. I would also like to acknowledge all victim survivors who are here today. I especially remember those people who have been tragically killed because of family violence. It is for these people I share my experiences in the hope that it opens up people's eyes to what they or someone they may know might be experiencing. And they may just realise that they deserve better, or it might highlight the continued ongoing systemic injustices and failures in our society for all survivors, especially children and young people who are the forgotten survivors. I would also like to add that this does discuss elements of family violence, and as Andrew said, if something makes you feel uncomfortable, please feel free to leave the room. I won't be offended. Okay. I was doing some reflection before speaking today. It's nice to see you, Kylie, by the way. Nice to have a friendly face. And I was thinking about how interesting my life has been. I will tone it down because if we're being recorded, my parents are watching. How many risks I've taken, how many situations I've put myself in that perhaps were not safe and in fact were scary. In the 1990s, at the age of 17, I used to volunteer looking after young men in their homes who had been diagnosed with HIV, mostly gay men whose families had rejected them. They had AIDS-related illnesses and were dying, and I would care for them at home during their last months of life, a pretty risky thing to do at the time when there was no cure for HIV. I survived bullying at both primary school and secondary school, overcame panic attacks and anxiety, not today, and more recently in 2019 I survived, very luckily, I survived sepsis after a hip replacement. And yet nothing has ever been as scary as living in a situation of domestic abuse. Living with someone who professed to love me, someone who I loved and trusted, someone who let me down by controlling me and abusing me, and my son. We bought a home together, we raised a son together, yet she controlled us. She was emotionally, verbally, and financially abusive, but the most damaging thing she did was she gaslit me. And for people who don't know what gaslighting is, it's probably one of the most damaging forms of family violence, because your abuser makes you feel like you're going crazy. I genuinely believed that I was going crazy. I genuinely believed that my partner was going to put me into a psychiatric facility. In fact, she told me that many times. She told me that if I went to the police, they would take away my son. She had me believing that everything I thought was real was not real. And it got to the point where one day I nearly drove off a bridge because I genuinely thought that the world would be a better place without me. I genuinely thought that my son would be safer without me because I was going nuts. And I wanted to share this at the beginning because I feel like there might be some people who might be able to relate to this. They might have a partner or a family member who tells them or makes them feel that they're going crazy. And I'm here to tell you that this is gaslighting and this is a form of domestic abuse. So you may have noticed as I've been talking that my abuser was a female. I've always known I was a lesbian since my teens, and all of my adult relationships were with females. I gave birth to my son when I was 25, and I certainly didn't meet the usual stereotype of being a lesbian mum in the year 2000. Most of my friends were older and had established careers and had purchased homes and lived on the north side of the Yarra. I'm in Melbourne, by the way, before having children. I was living with someone who had her own issues on the south side of the Yarra, renting a home, and had not figured out what I wanted to do when I grew up, other than being a mum. I realised that the relationship was very unsafe for my son and I left, with Andrew's help actually, when my son was 10 weeks old. And we went back and I lived with my family. We, my brothers and I, are very lucky to have supportive parents. Anyhow, whilst life wasn't easy, I got on with living my life. I found another place to rent. I was raising my son, and when he turned 2, I started studying community development, and I really found my calling. I found my people, my tribe, and I realised that this was what I was meant to be doing, working with people, and my son was thriving. I was living a good life. I was volunteering, I was working, I was a single parent, and I had a good network of friends. A single parent friend of mine introduced me to the person who would later become my partner, my abuser. I really didn't want to be in a relationship, and I should have trusted my gut. And that's my first message, always trust your gut. Anyway, this friend said, I want you to meet someone, she's just questioning her sexuality, and you've been out for such a long time, and you're so comfortable within yourself. Might be good if you could help her, get to know her so she feels comfortable. And I thought, I can do that. That's my kind of thing to do, helping someone who might be questioning their sexuality and wanting to meet other lesbians and chat to them. And like I said, I wasn't interested in a relationship, so I didn't have any worries, so I didn't think I would get myself into that situation. But it turned out this woman was very charismatic, very charming. She knew all the right things to say. She paid attention to me. She put me on a pedestal. She paid attention to my son and lavished us with gifts and me with flowers and compliments and all those things that somebody who already suffers from low self-esteem and self-doubt craves. She said all the right things at all the right times, and this is called love bombing. My son liked her. She was fun. She was a kinder teacher. Yet despite all of my gut feelings, I ended up in a relationship with her. She moved into the house that I was renting quite quickly. She worked near me, so she made it seem like it was a natural thing to do, even though we only had been together for a few months. And this I see now as a red flag. She moved all her furniture in, and slowly she told me she didn't like my furniture, and I should get rid of it, as it didn't match her furniture. She even convinced me I should give up my Labrador, as she thought the dog was too big. She would tell me she didn't like what I was wearing or didn't like my hairstyle, so I slowly started changing who I was. And then, instead of listening to my gut feeling, I became further entrenched in the relationship. And we bought a unit together in Bayswater, which was quite a distance away from my family and my support networks and my friends, and I was isolated. Not long after moving to Bayswater, my son started school. I got a job even further away from the home in the city. She got a job much closer to home, which meant, of course, that she had more control over what was happening at home. I had to put my son in before or after school care at school because I had no family nearby to help, and she didn't want to have to look after a child after work. The cost of the before and after school care fell to me, along with all the other everyday expenses, while her income went to her half of the mortgage, some food, and her entertainment. She earned a lot more than I did, yet her income was hers to play with. Sometimes she'd use it to take us on a holiday, but that was how good she was, you know. I took you on a holiday. I bought you nice things. And I was lucky to have $10 left at the end of a fortnight. Anyhow, as we settled into a new sort of normal as a couple and a family, another red flag came up. I remember her saying to me once, if we ever break up, you'll never get the house. Don't think you'll get the house. And I couldn't understand that because I'd paid for half of the house. It was our home. How would she be able to keep the house? And why was she talking about breaking up? As she became more comfortable and had more control, she chipped away at that pedestal that she'd put me on until there was barely anything left holding me up. By the end of the relationship, my son and I were both walking on eggshells all the time. I recall little things like my son having to call her at work to ask her if he could have something from the pantry after school, even though I would be standing right next to him in the kitchen. He couldn't ask me because he was too afraid of what might happen if she came home and noticed it was missing from the pantry. And that makes me really sad to think of now. Another red flag was that I was never able to speak to my family on the telephone without her listening in or telling me that what I was saying was wrong, or don't say that, or, that's not true, Martina. And all of these things add up to one thing. We were being coercively controlled. What's mine was hers, and what's hers was hers. In 2012, my partner and I were at a concert and happened to meet up with someone who I'd met a long time before, and I introduced her and her partner, another lesbian couple, to my partner, and we all got along really well. I wasn't allowed to have my own friends, certainly not lesbian friends, because my partner would accuse me of having an affair with anyone she saw me talking to, even men. What part of lesbian didn't she understand? So with these friends, we went to concerts and to each other's homes. We were a couple, they were a couple, so it was safe to catch up together, according to my partner. One day, this friend noticed that I'd made some unusual comments and asked me if everything was okay, because I seemed upset and I was very quiet. I told her things weren't great at home and that my partner yelled at me a lot and was quite abusive. This friend named it. She told me this was family violence. And that conversation literally changed my life. She had the courage to call out something that I have no doubt other people in my friendship groups or my community had noticed but were too afraid to say out loud. That moment absolutely changed my life. It was like a light bulb going off, and that woman is my best friend today. When I told her that I was in this situation, and she named it for what it was, domestic abuse, family violence, we set about making a plan. We set about doing things that we needed to do to make me and my son safe and to leave the situation we were in safely, and that was the scariest time of my life. When I finally left on October 1st, 2012, I call this my rebirth day, things weren't easy. My ex-partner was living in our house. She got what she wanted, while my son and I moved in with our friends. My son was about to start high school the following year and was heading towards being a teenager, and this was definitely one of the deciding factors for me leaving when I did, because I knew if I'd stayed it would have been even harder to leave as he got older. I'm not going to tell you what we had to do. I will, however, tell you that if you speak to Father Andrew confidentially, anytime, he will pass on my details and I will help you in whatever way I can. And this is how I give back now. I help survivors leave. But I'm here now to tell you some good news. I survived. My son survived. It's been nearly 13 years since I left my abuser, and my son and I are both thriving. My son is an amazing, nearly 25-year-old man who, despite the trauma he experienced, has gone on to finish high school, buy a home with his lovely girlfriend at the age of 20, travel, and is working full-time. He and his partner have a respectful and equal relationship, and they work hard at it. As for me, I repartnered, and that best friend I told you about is now my partner. We have a home together and lots of pets, and we have a happy, equal, loving, and respectful relationship. Most importantly, she supports me 100% in the work I do in talking about and educating people about family violence. I no longer fear my partner. I still suffer from trauma from my past relationship. But as time passes, this is lessened, and I'm reminded that I'm now safe. The work I do now also involves being an advocate on the Victim Survivors Advisory Council for the Victorian State Government to ensure the voices of survivors are heard and listened to and considered at the tables where all decisions are being made for people who are going through or who have experienced family violence. And I bring my LGBTQI+ lens to that council. Family violence is insidious. If you think it's not happening in your neighbourhood, you're wrong. If you think it's not happening in families where there's doctors, lawyers and police officers, you're wrong. It's happening everywhere. It's in your own street, in your own local community, and possibly in your family. And silence is what breeds violence. If we don't talk about it, things are never going to change. We need to acknowledge that domestic abuse can happen to anyone. 2 in 3 First Nations people aged 15 and over in 2018 to 2019 had experienced physical harm in the last 12 months, reported the perpetrator was an intimate partner or family member, according to the stats from the Australian Bureau of Statistics in 2019. Domestic abuse happens to women living with a disability. In fact, they are more vulnerable. The Commonwealth Government amplifies that vulnerability by making these people living with a disability more financially reliant on their partners. Because if they receive a disability support pension and are partnered, they may lose that benefit if their partner earns too much, leaving them financially reliant upon their partner and thus more vulnerable. My fellow lesbians, gays, bisexual, transsexual, intersex and queer community have high levels of family violence too. Physical violence, emotional abuse, coercive control, threatening to out them to their workplace, their family. That's all domestic abuse. Excuse me. Women from cold communities, women from different religious backgrounds, women who've been incarcerated. All of these people are at a higher risk of family violence. And if you have multiple risk factors, perhaps you are a queer woman with a disability from a multicultural community, you have an even greater risk of family violence. This is called intersectionality. And then, of course, there are the children and the young people, often the forgotten victims of domestic abuse. They are forgotten on so many levels, and the system that is supposed to protect them lets them down time and again. They are let down by the justice system when children and young people are forced to go and see the perpetrator of the violence as per court orders, because that's what's good for the children, often without actually asking the children what they want. Or their intervention orders expire on their 18th birthday and they're forced to go to court and face their perpetrator and fight for their rights to be safe just because they turned 18. To finish up, I want to remind you that family violence can happen to anyone. No one is immune. However, speaking about it, recognising the things I have mentioned today, and if you notice some of these things on an ongoing basis in your relationship or with someone you know, go and speak to someone you trust about it, such as Father Andrew. Looking back, the thing that made me realise I was in an abusive relationship was when someone I trusted recognised it and named it and then offered to help me. I was believed. I felt like someone cared and I felt like I had someone to talk to. Be that person for someone. There is no excuse for abuse. I warmly welcome any questions, and I know this is a lot to take in, and I appreciate you listening to me speak today. Thank you. Whatever. Yeah. What do you want?
We probably have a couple of minutes for questions if you have something you'd like to ask Martina or myself.
Don't be scared, I'll answer anything.
She will. I'd like to thank Martina being so vulnerable in telling her story, how brave that was. If you might decide over a cup of tea in the hall that might be a place where you'd like to catch up and talk to Martina. I'd like to just in one moment say the gospel we heard today, where Jesus talks about he and his Father coming to us and making their home among us and being the God of peace among us, is quite a juxtaposition to some of the challenges and the violence we know in our homes. Thus, up to us as Christians to live that peace, not only for ourselves, but then, as Martina said, to respond to those in need, to be a word of comfort and to believe those who are victims, to help them find their way out of domestic and family abuse. Thank you, Martina.
Thank you.